Howdy, howdy. Hold on. Hold on. This is probably me. No, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. I forgot to turn my mic on.
Cool.
It's wild to think that, like, in the 50s, they were like, we've invented this new space age material called plastic. It's going to change the world. And it changed the world by poisoning everyone.
Polycube.
We created a new kind of trash that doesn't degrade. And it poisons your balls. Like,
Poison. Yeah, I don't want to think about the plastics in the balls thing. I don't want to think about. Look, at this point, pretty much I'm like,
your cubes.
huh?
Show me your cubes. How are they different?
Bitter material. Like, I do not remember seeing yours and being able to see through it,
You
basically.
can see through these for sure.
You can see through?
Yeah, you can look, you can kind of see on the bottom.
Oh, they could. Maybe they aren't different.
I'm so tempted to take one apart. Because I must know what's going on inside this.
Yeah, I mean, well, from what I can tell is there's two magnets on there because I got the film thing to put on top of it. There's two magnets on either side. I believe there's a split in the middle, basically, that allows it, basically. So it allows them to come on either side. But like, again, that's about the extent of my knowledge of what I think is going on in there. I think there must be a couple of them there. I don't know.
I think there's something that rotates. Because it looks to me, fuck, it looks to me like these would be axles for the thing, but then it's also like it's very hard to know. And I don't understand how they get them to always be the right way. Which implies it's rotating or something, or they're round. I don't know. Can you make a round magnet? Does a magnet have to be flat?
Well, it can be. Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know. Like, you can make a round magnet, I assume, but like there's still only like you don't get much benefit out of it being round, right?
Yeah. If you confirm Aaron's coming.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna let you like take the lead on this. You know him better, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, here he is.
There he goes.
All right, you want to introduce it?
I will.
When you go.
What's up, Aaron?
It's going.
How's it going,
that
guys? Brian,
is an old shirt.
Oh yeah, it's all ripped. I'm in my workout clothes. I work at a gym.
Nice.
That's right. That's right.
You want to see the? I'll give you guys the banging rap music.
Are you at Collective?
Oh, that's killer.
Yeah, we have a little hole in the of an office up here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. You're with Scott over there. That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I'll go ahead and get it started. Are we live yet?
We're going live now.
Oh wow.
Now we're live. Cool. All right. Hey, folks, welcome to this episode of Lucid and Friends, or Office Hours, or Lucid Consulting Bros, or whatever we're calling this here. Today, I'm very excited to have Aaron Hayslip, who is founder of Freed Up, successfully ran a boot camp for, what was it, over 8 years for Parsity? How long did you have Parsity for?
Oh, Parsity not that long, like maybe.
That's right. Parsity was new, but you ran multiple different boot camps,
yeah,
and successfully exited. And specifically for the purposes of today, actually grew a podcast that became the #1 source channel for his for Parsity and the boot camp. and is actually in the running now currently. Are you still in the running for the other podcast, or did you get,
Yes.
you
Still
are
in the
still in
running.
the running? Okay, so that's
Yeah,
still
like
accurate. And
top
there,
2 so far.
all right, that
It's,
is, oh,
I
okay.
just got an email that a lot of the people were rejected and he liked my interview and he's waiting on a couple more to submit, but he says me and one other person right now.
We'll dive all into that. And the
Yeah.
reason I wanted to get you and to talk about this is that like having a podcast today is kind of like one of those things like, hey, you have a massive social media following, you have a podcast, you have like a free channel you own that you can basically just promote your product for free every single week. It's kind of the gold standard for what you want out of your business. Yet most people don't know how to do it and even or how to get started. And you're one of the people who actually did, and it actually was the reason why you're able to sell is because you had this really convincing, like, channel to say, we have a
Yeah.
podcast that brings in enough people, to the boot camp, and we'll do it. And that allowed you to exit the business successfully, which if you didn't have that, that would have been a lot more difficult. So we wanted to actually drill into how you got into that, how you thought about it, and just go into, for our folks, in a casual discussion, what it actually means to start and kick that off and get that scaling. So without, before that, I gave a brief introduction of you. Aaron, why don't you introduce yourself your own way?
Yeah, totally. So I wouldn't consider myself a podcaster, which is funny because the podcast was kind of a random thing that we did a few years ago when I had a bunch of in-person coding boot camps, teaching people how to code, become software engineers. And COVID hit and we continued to run, but it was terrible. Like it was such a mess because I'm teaching live all day online. We never made any profit. I think we lost $13,000. It was like the best we did. Um, we had full-time staff in person, all that. And then we went online. We took the boot camp online. And then finding students was different. Like whenever I had the in-person boot camp, finding students was hosting local events. So I did, I think, over 100 meetups for this meetup group I started in Durham where we had the boot camps. Then when we went all online, it was suddenly, oh, wow, I could have students from anywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so the podcast was a random experiment to just start creating content. And then it turned out to be, like a good channel for our students. And so what happened is, I think like the first month I had like 100 downloads. That's how I think Buzzsprout's what we were using. They call them downloads. They're listens because no one downloads anything. Actually, it's, you're streaming it.
Right,
But
right.
downloads. Then it was like 200. Then it was like 400. Then it was like 1,000. And then it was like 2,000. Then it was like 6,000. Like it probably took about 6 or 7 months to go from relatively no activity for probably the first 2 months to suddenly getting over 10,000 downloads a month pretty consistently. Now, so the podcast has been going on for a few years now, and I transitioned it over. So I sold the boot camp. The podcast went with it. The
Right.
new owner, he still gets about, nowadays he's getting about 15,000 downloads a month, which again, if you ask, like, this isn't Joe Rogan, right? Like, but for the niche, like people wanting to learn how to code to become software engineers, it's pretty substantial, right? Like it's a larger podcast in that little niche of the world. And I think what was most surprising for me in this process was in the beginning of starting the boot camp, it was just me, right? In an office by myself,
Right.
starting a whole new business. And I kicked it off by calling everyone I knew who
Now,
was,
what year was this? What year was this?
this was 2021.
This is 21. Okay.
Yeah. We had an email list a little bit from a previous boot camp. And so, but pretty soon I exhausted the entire list of everybody that I knew who was on our list, who'd come to an event, all of that. But I needed to keep on getting new students every quarter. And eventually I started getting a lot of applicants. And I was like, how in the world are they finding out about us? And thankfully I, did the genius thing, which is put in the application, how did you hear about us? And it was actually my assistant. She was like, hey, they're all coming from the podcast. And that's when I like, oh, really? That's when I finally looked at the numbers. And I was like, oh, because I was just consistently recording content because I heard that's what you're supposed to do.
So you weren't even aware that this was going to be everyone who puts out a LinkedIn or any sort of, channel knows, oh, this could, any farming technique, right?
Yeah.
Is that it could bring in people here, but that wasn't like, you weren't tracking that at that point there.
Not super closely. I'd seen a friend of a friend who had a podcast, and she shared her numbers, and she was like getting like 800 downloads an episode or something like that, or a month. And I thought like, wow, that's amazing. If I could get that much, that'd be really awesome just to have people hear about us. And my main motivation was, I was selling a high ticket item. It was, I think, $7,000, $8,000 to be in the boot camp. And people, it's a long sales cycle. People really want to know you and understand where you're coming from. And you can't just like market them for that long. You can't have a sales call for that long. But I knew from my own experience listening to podcasts that it's this opportunity where you get to like sit with someone for an hour, like maybe every week, and hear what they're about, know them, like them, trust them. And I heard that before. Someone said, you want your audience to know you, like you, trust you, and want to buy from you before you actually start selling them. And so I had one experience where I jumped on a call during these early days with a guy. And I think I had just done an episode where I was trying to teach someone like, how do you break a problem down into like multiple steps? And I forget the analogy. It was really dumb probably, but I think I walked through the steps like how to poach an egg, because that was something I had like tried before. I tried poaching an egg, and actually got really good at poaching eggs. And and I got on the sales call. This guy had applied, and he was like, "Holy crap! Like, this is the same voice from the podcast." And I was like,
So he
"Yeah,
knew you. It was doing its job of you had the
yeah."
brand work.
And he was like, "I just poached an egg from your directions. Like, this is amazing." But I realized then that how powerful was it that this guy knew everything about me, what my company valued, our business, because he's been like a listener of the podcast. It just made sales so much easier. So I wasn't expecting this massive growth. I was thinking maybe we would nurture people who are currently in the pipeline. And at that time, I got to the point in the business where most of my operations were automated or delegated to contractors or executive assistants or the different employees I had. And I was mostly spending my time focusing on like experimenting with just creating content, like videos, webinars,
Now,
podcasts.
let me dive into that for a sec.
Yeah.
So, what other content you have? So, okay, I used the term before here, and I'll just restate this for the audience here. We like to break up kind of, different lead generation activities into three buckets, basically: hunting, gathering, and farming. A lot of the stuff that brings in leads today, it's like cold messaging, direct networking, with folks, a referral I might put as gathering there, right? But it's like you're getting a sale right now, but it's direct ads are a way that goes in that. I'm there and it gets stuff in. Gathering, I don't know, Garrett, what you've put into that category there, but I know farming is very much a longer term activity, right? Where it's like I know I can go build content, and I know in theory this will build my SEO ranking. This will get people onto my blog. This will bring people to my website, and that will have a relationship. But you're not going to see that pay off for some time, right? And it can be quite a while there. So you seem to have had hunting activities that you were doing, right? Like, what were your main hunting activities you were doing? Or before the podcast, what were you doing? Or what were you trying to do? That way.
Yeah. I, so I actually don't think, I think it depends on the business. And again, I'm comparing two businesses. My current one, which we staff executive assistants for founders and CEOs.
Mhm.
I'm comparing that to the coding boot camp. The coding boot camp, it's hard to use your language, quote, hunt, right? Because normally thinking about hunting, I'm thinking of how can I filter by, just take LinkedIn, for example. Like, can I create a list of people that are in my target market, target demographic on LinkedIn? For coding bootcamp, no, right?
It would
Like,
be it
is
would
there
be challenging, and you spend a lot of
yeah,
time.
is there a filter for I hate my job, I want to be a software engineer, kind of thing, or I'm underpaid, or whatever those things are? And like, I tried that at one point, but one realized that no one's on LinkedIn who's like searching for a software engineering job. Because they are smarter than that. They know they can't just search for a job, they have to learn how to code.
Mm,
And so what I was doing before the in-person boot camps is we were doing these events. And those events were great. So for some reason, Meetup was super popular at the time, and people would jump on Meetup just to go to coding events. So it was a lot of that, a lot of word of mouth, a lot of community centered stuff, because again, we were local. No one's going to come to our event or our boot camp who doesn't live within like a 30-minute driving radius. And then, yeah, then when it came to the boot camp being online, I was basically taking those events and putting them on Spotify. Like that's kind of like the one way you could think of the podcast is like, I was just trying to do something that would get people who'd want to come and listen. Because again, there's no direct sales strategy. I didn't have like a target market or demographic necessarily I could go after. I guess I could have probably, and I probably experimented a little bit, like go find groups online. I think I tried at one point joining all of the free code camp Facebook groups, but none of that ever worked out. Owning a channel was like the way to go in that sense. And I'm thinking
So
about that now.
in both sense, then you've always kind of been owned media, right? I mean, I guess Meetup is kind of
Yeah. Well,
because
and my philosophy on that real quick was like, because I think you're thinking about owned versus paid. Like I always thought if my marketing engine works for like organic content, like we don't have to pay anything, then it's going to work for paid stuff, right? Because if you get a conversion from a lead on organic and you're able to figure out then how to nurture them into being a sale, then I'm probably going to do it with paid media too. But one thing I ran into before is like running a bunch of ads is like I can run a bunch of ads, get a bunch of leads, but if I don't have some kind of mechanism to nurture and then convert them, it doesn't matter like how many leads you get. So I've never, still to this day, I've ever spent really any money. I mean, I've experimented with money, but like it's never been a winning strategy for me. And that could be because I've never figured out how to do it. But I also don't think I think I will start to do it now with Freed Up, honestly. And it's because of that same situation. It's like I know how to now like target somebody. I can target somebody who is a founder, CEO of a business, is my age, lives in Austin, has 5+ employees, which implies their business is doing pretty good.
yeah.
Probably make an ad to them. And same thing with
Oh, yeah.
direct.
So I mean, kind of tying that back to what you mentioned before, it sounds like before the podcast, you had this lead generation activity, which was the meetups, right? And
Yeah.
you were local and you had events plus word of mouth brought in enough people to bring you in there. And then you had the nurture cycle underneath it. Like you had the system that you had that was, okay, when somebody applies, because I guess would that be the top of your funnel? Is the application the top of the funnel, or were there series consider, or like,
No.
okay, so what does your funnel actually look like then? Or,
Yeah, totally.
or
And
parsing?
so application was the bottom of the funnel. That's sales qualified lead, right? Like or opportunity at that point. I can't remember. But if you think about, I loved HubSpot's lifecycle stage definitions. So you got subscriber, lead, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, opportunity, customer, evangelist. So if I remember off the top of my head, my strategy was anybody who was going to give me their email address for some content that I would give them, and the content had nothing to do with my business in particular, that was a subscriber, right? So one of the things we had on the website was a how to focus when learning to code course, right? So this was a course that would help you learn how to focus while you're learning to code. Had nothing to do with Parsity. It didn't ask you to become a customer. It just gave you free content and you just give me your email address. So that's subscriber. And in that stage, I'm thinking, and I can be long-winded on this. We'll go back to podcast for sure because I have some other nuggets. But
yeah, that's fair.
In that stage, I'm thinking, all right, the goal is not to get you to a sell. The goal is to get you to now be a lead, which translates into I want you to now be interested in my product. So what I'm trying to do now is give you content that then brings up problems, right? So I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Like, all right, how to focus on learning to code. All right, now I know how to focus on learning to code, right? These are some great techniques, it's super helpful. But now what should I learn, right? Well, you should learn JavaScript. Awesome. JavaScript's hard to learn, but I know how to focus. Where do I learn it? And now it's like, okay, we'll teach you a JavaScript course now. So I'll give you some more content. And then after you go through the JavaScript course, I'm like still nurturing you. Like, are you interested in like what our next step is? Is it, our boot camp? And then if they want to request the syllabus, right? now they're a lead because they're not just a contact. Now they're a little bit interested in our business, not just learning to code. Because sometimes they're just, in the beginning, they're just there for the free stuff, but now they're interested in the business. So now that we have a lead, I'm trying to nurture them by giving them more content, mostly about freed up, or sorry, not freed up, Parsity. And I'm trying to give them stuff that like makes them feel a sense of FOMO, like want to be a part of it. And then so they might continue requesting different levels of content until all the way to the point where they're applying, right? Because that's like the end goal, is like to nurture them all to the point where they're going to apply. And then from there, it's like a sales process.
Right. Okay. So that's really fascinating. So like, okay, so you had the events that sat at the top here,
Yep.
but pretty much you had to take them through an entire process to get them through, like before they applied.
Yeah, some people would, go all the way down immediately, right?
Oh yeah, sure,
We
right.
haven't, and that's like that's intent, right? But we might get people who don't necessarily have an intent of doing a boot camp, and they need to be nurtured. They almost need to be convinced to do a boot camp, and they're not going to call you or talk to you about it because you're not even interested in that. But if you can give them content that's going to continue to solve some problems, but then reveal bigger ones, and then you keep pulling them along until they realize, hey, your ultimate problem will be solved by what we offer, which is the boot camp.
It's interesting. So you had that funnel figured out
Yeah.
before the podcast became a thing,
Um,
or it was how robust was it
yeah,
before?
yeah. I have a distinct memory of like locking myself in an office at the American Underground and like whiteboarding out. Like I had nurture series for every stage. We tracked every stage inside HubSpot. I had content for every stage. You're gonna get this. If you click this, you're gonna get that. Like it was all dialed in before the podcast came. The
How did you?
podcast, sorry.
Sorry. That's really fascinating. How did you figure out how to do that? Like, how did you learn to do that? Was that on the job experience? Did you read it somewhere? Did you just intuit it? Like, how did you come up with that process?
Running a really crappy boot camp for many years. Not really crappy, but like basically struggling to like have a business, struggling to get sales and struggling to do marketing. I was paying a marketing company at one point, thousands of dollars a month. And I'm like, oh, these guys don't know the secrets. Like the conclusion, and I read all the books. And the conclusion I arrived at is like, hey, there's no secret sauce here. Like there's no secret strategy. It's literally psychology. Like if someone doesn't know you, why do they want to take your boot camp? It's like they don't. They really don't. They might want something else though, and I might be able to provide that. So it turned into like I'm gonna try and create the most bad A like content possible, and then just give it away as much as I can. And then yeah, there's lots of that. Then we created this course called 90 days, not 90 days of action. Sorry, Dev 30.
That's the other business that you have going on.
Dev 30 was like the funnel for the boot camp, which was like a 30-day JavaScript course, much lower costs. And it was another opportunity for like, hey, if we can teach you well here, that kind of proves to you that we know how to teach you well, there. So anyway, yeah, we're getting off topic with the podcast for sure, but
No, I think the thing I want to point out here, and for, when we repurpose this and listen to it, here's the point. A lot of people jump to, if only I had this massive channel, it would all work out, right? If I only had a massive Twitter following, a big LinkedIn, a podcast, a live stream to do that. But I think the thing you're realizing here is that, especially for higher ticket sales, right? Which, for these, things there, that if you had the podcast, let's say you're back on day one and you just happen to have the podcast that had 10,000, 50,000 downloads, you might have walked away from that thinking, oh, it's nice for brand recognition, but it doesn't lead to a lot of sales, right? Like I get some sales, right? But the fact is that you knew, well, once they get on the podcast, if you drop right through, great, you're going to get those people. But then if they don't, well, here's the next step. Ooh, here's the next step. Here's the next step. I mean, there really is a journey that you took them on here, so that even if you want the podcast, you need to have these other steps figured out. That's the lesson I'm taking away from that.
Yeah, and you have to just reverse engineer like your successful situations, right? Like take the people that your customers you've had and walk through like their journey. Like, it didn't look like the way it's going to look in the future because you didn't have any of that content, or you didn't have that funnel. But they went through a journey. Like this is like the sales journey, right? That everyone talks about. It's like it's real, right? Like it took you a while. Think about anything that you've ever bought. It took you a while to like decide to buy it. Like there was like a journey that you went through until you're like, oh yeah, I gotta have that. It might be like a 30-second journey, but it might be for higher ticket items. It's going to be like a 3-month thing of, thinking through. And so, yeah, that's important for sure.
That's a great point. So, okay, so let's dive in.
I want to touch on something
Garrett, please.
said. I really like that no secret sauce bit. Having also, I've also read all the books, and that was something I always felt like, oh, there's going to be a trick, there's going to be a thing,
Yeah.
And maybe it was who wrote This Is Marketing, Brian.
Seth Godin.
Seth Godin.
Yeah.
I was reading that, which is a phenomenal book. And you get through it and you're like, man, you really thought there would be something like it's great. And one of the
it's a great book. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And as a book of its stature, like you would think, oh man, there was supposed to be a secret or something. And I think that's such an essential thing for people to understand, that there is not a tactic that you just do this one tactic and that's going to make things work. It's a series of things, but it does stem from that understanding. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I was always convinced, by the way, that's a good word to think through, tactic. Like most of what you hear in advice or even these books are tactics. And the tactic should be completely interchangeable. Like you're not married to it. It's not a big deal. It's the strategy that's a big deal, right? Like, and it's cliche to say, and I think you always be able to say this, but you actually need to listen, which is, man, what is your customer actually looking for? And I think a lot of the marketing problems, honestly, and I'm realizing this now with my new business, a lot of the marketing problems are because we don't have any marketing. Like we've done nothing. There's been no tactics. I've done some LinkedIn posts, but we don't have a drip campaign. You fill out our form, like online, I'm not going to see it. Like it wasn't in like, like I just now hooked up the Zap to it last week. I'm like, oh, people are filling this out. I should probably
Yeah, that is the most shocking thing to me because I just had a client where I was updating their website basically and filling out their form, and I was looking, and it's like, and this is like a serious company that's doing serious work, right? I won't mention the details, but like people were actually using the message. Like that was a serious flow where it's like actual big deal people were using that form to contact them. So I'm like, oh shit, people use these things.
Yeah. But it's like, if you have your positioning, like the offer correct, the marketing is going to be a little bit more straightforward. I think a lot of times we hear or see companies who, especially new founders, who are trying to figure out, I mean, God, Brian, we were in this with DevMint. It's like, oh, the marketing, how are we going to get marketing? How do we get exposure? And like, that's true. Like in order to find customers, people have to know about you. But if you don't have the right offer, the value proposition, if it's not something people actually want or need, or you're not talking to the right people, like it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like your good marketing will never fix a bad offer.
No, it's kind of it's really funny you bring up DevMint. And for the audience here, Aaron is Garrett and I started, or Aaron and I started a Web3 coding boot camp. What was that, 2022? I think it was. I think 2021 or 22. But anyway, we did this and we went through this and it was very hard. We got students, we took them through, love the program, but it's like, yeah, we always struggle to do that. Then you were at Coinbase and you basically said, let's just do the same thing, but for Coinbase, right? And there was some internal stuff, whatever, but I'll never forget this, where it's like Coinbase sent out one tweet on their channel and they had something like 500 applications show up the next day. And it's like, why didn't we think of that, Aaron? Just have a massive Coinbase account, have a massive Twitter account and send out one tweet.
Yeah, if you're like the top brand in crypto, that kind of helps, but right. that's not a journey that's that you can reverse engineer very easily.
And that's where it's like, I know for Garrett and I, we're, with our business with Lucid, one of the ways I've been kind of thinking about, well, how do I explain this to folks is that like, here's the thing. If you already have like a good marketing engine, like if you figured out all those funnel steps there or whatever, there's a lot of things you can do at the top and you can get numbers and metrics. If you have zero, though, if you have no flywheel in your impact, it's a very different game on what it looks like, right? How you play it, how you experiment, what you're learning is quite different. And we tend to be working with folks that really, if there is a flywheel, it's very minimal and it's not doing what it needs to, right? It's
Yeah.
a different game. And I want to ask you about your ideas for Freed Up at some point, because I know that's the next journey that, that's the next journey you have
Yeah.
going on. But okay, so when you actually ran
Can we
this,
touch on that? Actually, that was
yeah,
raises a good point. So
sorry, yeah.
I'm curious to get your take on this idea, Aaron. Like, because obviously you've bootstrapped a variety of things from zero. If you were giving advice to early stage founders that, like Brian said, don't have a marketing engine that's functional. So, the way that we're playing with this metaphor right now, but it's like you're walking around a room in the dark trying to figure out where the walls are, right? So there's very little way to know what works until you accidentally bump into something. You can walk in the wrong direction. You don't know how big the room is. You can spend tons of effort getting everything wrong. So if you are one of these early stage people and you're trying to build any sort of way, journeys or go to market, get customers, any of that kind of stuff, how would you go about that?
I think it depends. That's like a terrible answer, right? But because I am one of those right now, by the way. We're doing well, like compared to how old we are, freed up, but we don't have any kind of marketing right now. I mean, we're getting to the point where we want to create that. And I think my answer to that probably is like sales and marketing are just two pieces to like the larger problem, which is how do I get more clients? So it doesn't matter if it's like a sales strategy or a marketing strategy. Like right now, I think what's probably most valuable for us is probably just have a list of people. And actually, it's funny, y'all know Darren McKee, right? So we get on a call with Darren the other day because we're like, all right, Darren, teach us sales. Like, how do we sell? We don't know. Like, we've never done like direct sales. Like, you're a sales guy, you're doing great in LinkedIn. I know how to write on LinkedIn pretty good. I think I'm going to start writing some more. Like, what do you think? And he goes, okay, cool, guys. Like, who's on your list? And I was like, what? What list? We don't have a list. Like, he's like, well, who are like the 100 founders that you want to work with? I was like, we don't have 100 founders we want to work with. And he goes, okay, how many more sales do you need to be at $1 million ARR this year? I'm like 15. And he goes, how many think you could handle a week? I'm like, one, a week. And he's like, dude, you can knock this out easily. So why am I thinking about right now? Why would I like spend time thinking about building a podcast, a ads campaign, like a social following, doing webinars, events, or any of that? I need 14 people to say yes to my offer, right? So I could probably just really easily, and this is actually what we're going to start doing next week, make a list, 200 people. Let's tackle 5 a day, and let's just start reaching out to them and building relationships.
Now, do you guys have Sales Navigator, or have you guys invested in any of that?
We have Sales Navigator, but I'm like,
No, because that's something that I've learned. And I think for our particular clients, they could all benefit from this basically, is that most of the people we deal with have a like named number of accounts they could do. You're a little bit different because what's your annual contract value like for your clients?
36,000.
Okay. So they're right at the line, Garrett. That's interesting. We just talked about this week of like what the go-to market strategies are. What is that?
They're right in the line of being named accounts. They're they're not though. That's because it's more commodity service, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
If it was double that, it would be different. But yeah, that is the highest end like pre-named accounts.
But
yeah,
right. To finish answering your question, like I'm answering this for myself. So I don't know if I can have advice, right? But I know what my plan is. So it's to do this. It's like to do direct sales to get us to that number, right? Because like you said, Brian, like starting a podcast is a long-term move.
Right.
It takes a long time to get the flywheel rolling and impactful. But I do think in parallel with that, like it is good to be putting content out into the world. Like while you're having a sales strategy, and I think the content can be the nurture. right? Like if you don't have a drip campaign, you don't have a free webinar and like the free course and the checklist or all the kind of stuff you're supposed to be putting out in the world, I think just putting out content is valuable. And so my plan is like, I'm going to start posting on LinkedIn regularly. I can't say that word regular. I don't know this.
Your grace.
Whatever part of Texas I'm
Grace.
from just doesn't have that word. But it's so people know me, right? Like, and to see my content, to see that I've established authority, I know what I'm talking about. And we've gotten a lot of sales from LinkedIn, just because people see our content. And it's not like a one-to-one. They don't see our content and then like DM me and say like, I want to buy. They'll say, I'll run into somebody and they say, oh yeah, I knew about Freed Up because I saw you guys talking about it.
That is the most shocking thing to me that I still have to learn over and over again. Because I've been lucky to have, like I said, I got 20,000 plus followers on LinkedIn. So when I post content, I have a nice group that sees it. I've been very big on core in the past, right? To see this. And it's like, you see, like, if I put out a month of posts, I'll get somewhere between, I don't know, 5,000 to 10,000, or actually, no, more than that, like 20 to 50,000 views, right? And I don't think it's like, I see people who react directly to it, right? But I don't see that. Well, like the other day, or actually this just happened yesterday, I was messaging somebody on LinkedIn and they just casually brought up, oh, I saw the post you wrote about this thing. You absolutely nailed that, right? Between product and services. And I'm like, it took me aback because it's like, you remembered a post I wrote and they did that. And yeah, people are actually listening. They're used. I don't know if this is true today because again, the social media has gotten way easier to use, so these are likely skewed. But it used to be like back in the day, and Reddit did a study. It's like 90% of the users are lurkers, 9% are commenters, 1% are posters. So for every one person who's actually creating actual content, there are 90% of the people that won't even like it. They won't even do, they may like it, they may see it, but half of them are just looking at it, right? They don't even think to engage, but they're reading it. They're actually retaining that information, which is why, like, when you put out content in the world, and now we're going to bring this back to the podcast. The most important thing that I found for any of those endeavors, whether you're doing LinkedIn or a podcast or videos or whatever, is like, I like Hormozy, get the crappy 100 versions out as fast as possible, because you are going to suck no matter what. It's a rule.
Yeah, with podcasting, I have a few thoughts that I have opinions about, because I think that's true, right? Get the 100. It's almost like this balance between being strategic, like make sure you have a good plan, you spend time thinking about your podcast ahead of time, but then just getting the episodes out of the way. I think you're right, like some consistency and just making it happen. You can't go too fast though. But you also can't spend all your time being strategic.
All right, let's get this organized out. Unfortunately, we have this recorded so I can get these notes out and stuff like that. So, okay, when you say plan it out, what do you mean by plan? Like what does a plan for a podcast look like?
This is what I'm talking about. So I can go around the corner right now and there is like a legendary, beautiful podcast studio in this space. Tim Ferriss, Sean Puri, all those guys have recorded in the studio that's here. And it's awesome. And these guys run a business like inside of Collective, recording other podcasts. So anybody that's here can pay, I don't know what the monthly membership fee is, like $1,000 a month, and go and get like this beautifully produced podcast. And I was talking to them the other day on the phone about podcasts, and another member came up to me, one of the many people who are here in our co-working space, Jim, who have a podcast. And he's telling me all about his podcast and kind of trying to figure out, hey, why isn't it growing? Right? We've been at it for a long time. His business partner has like 250,000 followers on Instagram, but they're just getting a few views or a few listens for each podcast episode.
Interesting.
And I was convinced that the problem was in his positioning of the podcast, right? Like we somehow think, everyone assumes that in order to create a great podcast, you can just sit in a room with your buddies and talk about stuff that's interesting to you. And people who are like,
hey, don't diss our office hours.
Just saying, it might be true for this very thing. I don't know. And just assume that other people want to also listen in on those conversations, right? That's what people think podcasting is. But podcasting is so much more like writing on LinkedIn, or it's so much more like creating a good blog or good copywriting or building out like a good marketing funnel than it is just sitting in a room having interesting conversations. Even what's crazy too is these guys will get like 10x guests, like famous guests, people that you would think, oh, if I have this person on my podcast, it's going to give credibility to my podcast. And you think, oh, they're going to share it. They're not going to share it. You know what I mean? Like I had Justin Welsh on the coding podcast. I was like, dude, this is awesome. Justin Welsh is like the man on LinkedIn. And he came on the podcast and talked about LinkedIn. That podcast episode, just okay. Like it did not do nearly as well as the episode where I talked about why most people fail coding boot camps. And it's because Justin's on 1,000 podcasts. He's not sharing the episode where he came to my podcast with everyone. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't give a rip that he's on my podcast. He just wants our listeners to buy his stuff, like his LinkedIn course. And so I think everyone has these like assumptions that this is what needs to happen. So this is kind of, and this was, I think, my post that I posted today, Brian, that you talked to me about. Like, all right, if that's true, then like what makes for a good podcast? And this is why I'm thinking, why I say you need to take some time to actually strategize this out. I'm convinced of a few things. One, your podcast, and this is me basically just reverse engineering my one successful podcast. So like, I may not know what I'm talking about. But I think your podcast needs to be aimed at helping some specific audience achieve like one specific measurable, achievable goal. The whole podcast is about that. So like develop yourself. It was all about becoming a software engineer. Like every episode, every goal, every like thing we talk about has to do with like just one goal, becoming a software engineer, right? My first million, right? It's about more or less. I mean, they've been able to like pivot a little bit because they're huge, but it's more about like making your first million, right? The Huberman podcast, it's about getting fit and healthy, right? Every episode is about getting fit and healthy. That's the whole thing. Now, if you were to just make a podcast about getting fit and healthy or making $1 million, becoming a software engineer, well, there's 1,000 of those out there. So your podcast is not going to be unique. So the next level is thinking about what's your solution? Like, how do you get people to becoming a software engineer, making their first million, or getting healthy and fit, right? And my solution was not like JavaScript necessarily, right? That's not something I'm really good at. What I'm really good at is personal development, right? So I know everything there is to know about personal development. I'm super amped about that. I love productivity. I'm a nerd on that kind of thing. My first million, they're like next level at generating business ideas and talking about weird, obscure ways to make money. Andrew Huberman, science-backed protocols. He uses that word all the time. Here's our cold protocol for cold plunge. Here is our muscle hypertrophy protocol for building muscle. It's all about protocols, like science-backed, step-by-step lists for how you do something. So this is the niche within a niche, right? So then once you know what your specific solution is to that problem, now you have a podcast that is a niche within a niche. So not just a podcast about coding, but a podcast for career changers who want to become software engineers through personal development, right? And there's no other podcast like that. Like, so that's what develop, and I didn't realize this at the time, that's what Develop Yourself was. It was the thesis or the premise of the podcast was there are a lot of reasons why people are successful at becoming a software engineer.
But shocks me that you didn't know that to get before, because again, being around Garrett now, I think a lot about naming and words or whatever. Develop yourself hits that so beautifully. The fact that you said you didn't realize it until afterwards is shocking to me because it's so.
Well, I didn't realize that it was a niche within a niche. I did realize that I don't know how to talk about, like, if you, like, because Syntax FM, right? You know that podcast? Wes Boss.
Yes,
like
yes, I do.
Probably one of the top 5 coding podcasts, technology podcasts, period. Wes Boss was also a guest on my podcast, and no one cared. It was not a good interview. I was terrible at it, but and he didn't share with his friends. But they go like super deep into like what are their favorite new technologies. Like they're a JavaScript like gurus. They freaking love JavaScript and talking about all the new libraries and frameworks, and it blows up. I couldn't do that, right? Because I don't really like coding that much. You know, like I knew like the reason why I did the boot camp was because I love to see people go from, I have no job, I have no prospects, I'm depressed, to holy crap, now I'm making 6 figures, I have insurance, I love my job, it's low stress. Like that's the thing that I love. And that's what I experienced myself too, right? It's almost like you have to go through the journey yourself and be a participant. And now I'm like, okay, well, how did I get there? It wasn't because I was awesome at JavaScript or this, it's because I was disciplined. It's because I learned how to network. It's all of these things. And that was really my first episode of the podcast was, and I think that's kind of the playbook I'm going to go for this next one too, which is the first episode is kind of your thesis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why most people fail coding boot camps, right? That was the first episode. And I gave my answer, which was, has nothing to do with your background, your degree, all of this. It has everything to do with like, what kind of person are you when you start the boot camp, right? And are you the kind of person who's disciplined, who like can focus, who can achieve things, yada, 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 yada. If you are, great, go ahead. If you're not, or you think you might not be, here's some strategies for how to do that. And then every episode, last thing real quick before I'm done rambling. You guys know what like a pillar page is for SEO? So normally like an SEO strategy is like you write one giant piece of content, like a central guide. And then you write a bunch of other posts that link off to that. So like you might have a guide of like how to become a software engineer. And it's like everything you need to know about becoming a software engineer. What language should you choose? Like, what's the best time of day to code? Like, how do you find a job? Like just every little thing. And they all link back to like the central theme of how to become a software engineer. Now, this is good for SEO because you have all these backlinks or whatever
Right.
about SEO. I don't know much about SEO, but this is your podcast. Like you have one central goal and every episode is just like hitting that central goal at different parts of it. And I think that's what makes a successful podcast. So, and most people are just get on the mic rambling.
That is the most compelling case for how to think and start up that I think I've ever heard. I mean, that's actually quite extraordinary. So we'll do that. Like I'm imagining here and now. I don't know what the one page is going to look like on this because I definitely want to do this. But like, so to summarize what you're saying, you picked out a niche, right? And you have this niche here that was software dev, but even more specific, new folks, right? Getting into it, right?
Yep. I think, Brian, not to stop you, but I would more say what's the biggest question is what's the central goal of your audience?
That's true. Well, here, what I'm talking about is I'm almost looking at the landscape from like, what is this category? Like if I had to type into Spotify, software development for beginners, right? Or whatever, you're going to get a bunch of podcasts and there's going to be lots and lots and lots of folks there. And there's going to be episodes that go off to it. What you had that was interesting is that you basically had two things here. You had a goal of what you were trying to do with this. You have one goal, which again, for develop yourself was what?
Become a software engineer.
Become a software engineer. But the second thing here, and this is something I've noticed with how do you actually create good content, there's a particular perspective you have.
Yeah. Which is also your solution. Like your unique solution. Because I think someone could say here, well, I didn't get a computer science degree. So could I actually get a software engineering job? And they could say, well, the solution is go get a computer science degree. Or like go learn more stuff. And I'm like, there's a lot of places that you can go learn more stuff. But our solution was like work on yourself. You know?
That's a really interesting thing, right? Because all of a sudden now you have this crowded space of beginner software developers wanting to learn. You have the goal, we're going to get you into by doing something else, right? I'm big into personal development, so we're going to personally develop ourselves to get out. And that basically got you a really nice cross-section of this group where other folks could have gone elsewhere, but instead they got attracted to that. But these are the two things you were saying was real good. Okay, well, that is very interesting. So
one other piece of this is like the searchability, because one of these same guys I'm having a conversation here with at Collective, who's trying to start this podcast, he was asking me tips on, all right, well, how do I distribute this? Should I like email list, social media? And I just said, I don't know. Like, I don't think I shared the podcast on social media more than like 3 times ever. Like we had 0 distribution. everyone found it. And again, I still don't know the answer. I think people either find it by searching Spotify, something comes up, or like you just make your content so good and so unique that it's going to be shared. Because all the time I would see message boards, I can still go find them now, like on Reddit, best podcast for learning to code, develop yourself, always gets mentioned. Someone's like, oh, I found this one super helpful. I still get messages every week from people
You
saying,
got positive feedback on content on Reddit?
yeah.
Wow,
That's what I'm
that's the
saying.
win.
Like,
That's
your podcast actually has to solve a problem, right? Like, and I think everyone gets into like, how can I distribute it? Blah, 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 blah. Like you just make good content, right? And the distribution, all that will come later. One more big thought I have on podcasts. I think regardless of how big your TAM is, your total addressable market, or how big your podcast is going to be, I think your podcast there's a lot of other benefits to making a podcast besides I'm going to get leads. And that is, one is content engine, right? I haven't done this so much, to be honest, but this is going to be my experiment coming up if I don't get the MoneyWise podcast. If I get the MoneyWise podcast, I'm not starting my own podcast. But
correct.
if I don't get it, then I'm going to start a podcast again. And I don't know if it's going to get as big as Developer Stuff, right? That might have just been a fluke. Everything I'm telling you right now could be full of crap. I think it's right, though. But if nothing else, like I'm going to use it to build newsletters, social posts. I'm going to repurpose that content to death to basically be my library of opinions and ideas for content. Then I think also if you have a podcast, but you have only a few listeners, but you have the right listeners, it doesn't matter. I need 14 more clients to like basically replace like great income for me and my family from the Coinbase days, to have a really solid business, to be at $1 million ARR. And that's all I need. So if I have 50 people listen to my podcast, but half of them become clients, like that's a massive win. So I don't think you need to gauge the success of your podcast on necessarily like how many downloads you get or how big it gets, because you might actually have like a pretty small niche in the first place. I think that's actually where we were. Like 15,000 is pretty good. But I talked to a guy the other day who has 100,000 downloads a month on his podcast. But he's selling like a $30 course, and I was selling a $8,000 course.
$8,000 boot camp. Yeah.
Yeah. I need way less clients than he does.
So, all right. So here's my question for you on how to think about it. Because again, like I find, because now that I'm going out and doing cold messaging, outreach, things like that, it's difficult. It's often difficult to get out of my head because I've been in this business so long to do this. So like you found it where it's like, oh, we want to help developers. Like your answer seems obvious. I know it didn't end up that way. So right now, your perspective is probably still going to be personal development. If that's the thing you're still interested in, that might be the perspective, but you may change it. What's the goal you would focus on? If you had to come up with a thesis, what do you think
for
would
freed up?
Yes, for freed up.
Okay, let me talk you through this. This might actually be helpful, but it's also helpful for me. Because I've been thinking about this a lot. I want to create a podcast for freed up and to serve all these purposes, a content engine for me, a way to nurture our listeners, and hopefully a way to drive more leads. I'm trying to think about the central goal of our listeners would be the same as the goal of my clients, right? Like, why do my clients need an executive assistant? It's because they're stressed out, they're overwhelmed, they're working too much, their home life is disorganized. If you ever have to call your insurance company, like that sucks. I experienced this before. We all experienced it. It's terrible. So it is an executive assistant obviously solves all that. Now we do things a little differently at Freed Up, right? We build out all of the systems for the client. We build all the SOPs that the EA is going to work on, and we train them. So that's like our unique value proposition that like no one else does, is like, it's just us. We do that. And so I'm thinking about what's the end goal, and to say like their end goal is to be more free. One of the things I said here is your goal has to be measurable, right? Like, and to say you're more free isn't a good end goal, because it's not super clear. And so I arrived at, and again, this is workshop, so I have no idea if this is going to happen or not, but two things. Your goal is that your business would run by itself. So there's a great book by Mike Michalowicz called, he's the same guy who wrote Profit First, called Clockwork. And he does a wonderful job of, he has this test. And I don't know if this is real or not, but this is good. This is good content, which is, can you take a 4-week vacation and nothing fall apart? Right. So the entire book's basically how to get to a point of, at the end of the book, you take a 4-week vacation. If you follow the book, you should be able to take the 4-week vacation. So it's almost, so I'm just adopting that. Like, can your business run by itself? How can you tell? You can take some kind of extended vacation. And then same thing with your life. Can your life run by itself, right? Meaning as in, if you took for a month and you did no personal tasks, if you didn't try and like keep up with your budget, if you didn't try to keep up with your toll bills or any of that, would everything be fine, right? Because you have sort of automated or delegated all this stuff away. So can your business run by itself? Can your life run by itself? Like, those are the central goals for these people. Now, these folks in particular they're founders of businesses. That's what I want. And my solution, because there's a lot of ways that you can get your business run by itself or your life run by itself, right? You can you can like hire a CEO.
You can minimize it, right? Just make it so small that you can automate everything away, right? That's an angle.
Yeah, absolutely. So my goal is through systems, right? You should be able to build out systems in your life and delegation, right? You should be able to systems of delegation combined to be able to then make your business run by itself. And again, I am the person, like my story, I went first, right? Parsity, like automated it, delegated it, ran by itself. Same with life, hired an EA, ran by itself. Not only did I take a 4-week vacation, I took a very high-paying job at Coinbase. So I chose what to do with my time. It was not to vacay. It was to take another job. But that's what I'm thinking through for the podcast. And it's just gonna be called Systems Driven Founder. So the idea is like, are you a system driven founder? Are you the kind of person who's going to build systems in your life so that you can be successful at work and be fully present in your life? And obviously, like, the ultimate plan, if you want like to pay someone to just do it for you, then you can be a client of Freed Up. Just like, hey, if you want to become a software engineer, if you want someone to do it for you, just go through Parsity. So who knows?
That sounds good to me. Like that. Yeah,
Me too.
That's one of those that, as far as a thesis for how to go, again, you don't know what reality is going to look like when you actually get out there. You can't know. But as far as hey, I'm going to do this. Does this sound like a good plan? To me, it sounds like, yeah, it does.
Here's my thesis, right? So my first episode for Develop Yourself was why most people fail coding boot camps. And the answer was because of personal development, more so. This one is something to do with how come you're not actually free, right? Like most entrepreneurs, like if you were to get down to it, like why do we start businesses? We want freedom. Like we're not going to do the 9-to-5 grind thing where we only make a certain amount of money. We're going to like build big, make a ton of money, retire early, or at least have options.
Yeah, right.
Follow the normal thing. But statistically, and I had ChatGPT give me all these statistics, divorce rates are higher, income's lower, like stress is higher, suicide rates are high. Like all the metrics that ask, are you free for business owners and entrepreneurs, points to no, your life sucks. Right? Like, question is, hey, you started this to get free. Guess what? You're not free. You're anything but. You're overwhelmed. Life is terrible. Like you have so many responsibilities at work. Any day now, you have an existential problem that like your business could be devoured. Like you could lose all of your income. Your wife could leave you. Your husband could leave you. Like your kids may not see, like all these things are massive problems. Like what's the solution? Systems, my friend. If you want to become a systems driven founder and like get your crap together and get organized, there is a way, right? There's a way to do this smartly. And yeah, anyway, so that's like, I think the thesis episode is basically that. It's like the freedom trap. You thought you were going to be free, bro. You're the least free person I know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree that we've experienced that.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, Aaron, I am enjoying the absolute crap out of this, but we are getting to the top of the hour here and doing this. I really want to thank you for coming on. This was an incredible discussion. I'm really happy we got to talk about this. Real quick though, I want you to give your pitch on Freed Up. So what's your messaging pitch? What's your pitch?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when founders think about bringing on an executive assistant or an assistant, admin assistant, whatever you want to call them, it sounds bad because it usually means more work for you, right? You've got to like figure out how do you now make your life delegatable. And as far as I know, I think we're the only ones solving for that problem. So what we do is we'll do like one 90-minute meeting with you. So frictionless. We ask you a series of pointed questions. From there, we build out all of your SOPs, like custom build them. And then we train your EA. So we go hire someone offshore, usually the Philippines. And for about 4 weeks, we train them on all of your SOPs. When you kick off, they can handle your life. It's relatively minimal work for you. So yeah, we take all the pain out of having an executive assistant. $3,000 a month. So usually less than the cost of your lowest paid employee. And for most cases, you're able to double down on the things that you love in your job that actually give you the most joy and make you the most money. And then you're able to be fully present at home with, your kids and family and friends and all those kinds of things because you're not worrying about, oh, crap, did I categorize my expenses this week?
Right. That's okay, cool. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. I very much appreciate this. I'm very excited to see where you guys go. Now we're kicking up another 90 days of action, so I'm going to be seeing
Yeah,
you
man.
a lot more over the next few weeks. But anyway, thank
Yeah.
you so much, and yeah, best of luck with the the new podcast. If you start up
Either
or
system
take it
driven
over.
founder or money wise.
Right.
We'll see.
All right.
Thanks, Aaron.
Aaron,
Thanks
thank you so
everyone
much.
for watching. See you next week.
Do I leave or are you just stopping the recording?
Broadcast is ended.